Hello, I'm Paul Evans and I'm here in my studio at Yorkshire Artspace Persistence Works, which is on Brown Street, bang in the centre of Sheffield. And I'm up here on the third floor, Studio 42. I'm really rather glad that my studio has that number, because if you've read Douglas Adams, you'll know that 42 is the answer to life, the universe and everything. So amongst other things, this is a place where I come to for answers, really, yeah. So the question that's troubling me today is, why do I paint abstracts? And I think before we kind of really start to think about the words and get hung up on the terminology, I think it might be a good idea to have a look at a few examples of abstract paintings by other painters to kind of get an idea of what we mean by that in a kind of visual sense before we kind of get too sort of hung up on words. Right. So here's a painting by Wassily Kandinsky. It's from 1913 and it's entitled Composition 7. It's in oil on canvas, quite a big painting. And what can we say about this? First of all, I think it's really rather beautiful. The colours really are so vibrant. There's an idea that Kandinsky might have had a condition called synesthesia, where he almost saw feelings or sounds as colours and shapes. It's a theory that might be what's happening here. And I mean, to a certain extent, I think Kandinsky was kind of harnessing some of that kind of abstract sense of music, really, in his paintings. Let's have a look at another one, another abstract painting. Okay, so this one is by Kasimir Malevich, and it is from 1915, and it's called Black Suprematic Square. And what do you think he means by this? What does he mean by this? I guess to a certain extent, even though it's square, this could be seen as being something of a full stop. It's like the end point of painting as representation of the real life, of the external world, really. It's maybe more of a kind of idea that all of that has kind of been done, and what we need now is a painting that represents or expresses something else. So what is it expressing exactly? Well, I mean, it's a black painting, so maybe it's expressing the death of something, almost, perhaps the death of representation, and in a way, perhaps the untruthfulness of representation, the fact that representation of visual reality is very often something of an illusion, something untrue. I think it's kind of interesting that, considering I think he was trying to create something quite pure and perfect, the surface of this has not kind of weathered well over the years. You know, that the varnish cracked on the surface. Even so, I think that actually lends it, I think, to to the eyes that we're looking at. If we're looking at it from our eyes, with the eyes of our generation, it's quite beautiful, that cracking. Okay, so this is by Helen Frankenthaler, and it's from around about 1952, and it's called Mountains and Sea. I think it's interesting that she's using the words mountains and sea to talk about, well, as a title for the painting. And I think that title does talk about the painting, even though it's really just a collection of marks in different colours or different coloured areas of paint. It does suggest something of landscape, something of nature. I'll come to landscape tomorrow, actually, if you can join me for my next talk. This is another painting that might, in a way, suggest some kind of landscape. And this is by Joan Mitchell. I'll talk about Joan Mitchell a little bit, because she saw painting as a kind of, she used the term liquid thinking, and I think there's something nice about that idea of allowing paint to kind of flow on a surface and really to see what happens. So in a way, you end up with a kind of dialogue or a discussion with the painting that's shaping itself before you. This painting is called No Birds, which I think has a kind of weird, I think that whenever we look back at things, we can kind of see them for what they are, and the way they were made at the time they were made. But I think if we think about what's actually happening to birds at the moment, in a way the devastation of the wild population of birds, I think a title like that, in a way, has a really interesting contemporary resonance, which it didn't have at the time it was made. When Joan Mitchell was painting this, she was thinking about Van Gogh's painting, Field with Crows. I think the title was something like Field with Crows, and in a way, she saw that as being almost like a premonition of his forthcoming death, or something like that. I think if you look at the colours and the way that the paint is applied, there's something quite there's something very energetic, and something that you could almost see as being quite violent about the way that the paint's been put down. And I think that expresses something of her emotions. You know, she's expressing, I think, maybe something of anger, or something of not necessarily the most positive of emotion through the marks that she's making. Although we see at various points in the canvas some areas of pink and blue that are kind of, in a way, peeking through quite optimistically from that quite almost savage kind of ground of marks. Okay, everybody will be familiar with Mark Rothko, and this is a painting from 1949 called Number 3, Number 13, magenta, black, green on orange. Again, the question is, what is this about? And to a certain extent, I think that if you read what Mark Rothko wrote about his painting, he's a very interesting writer. He felt that he was trying to capture some kind of sense of spirituality, or even, I think, again, you know, how do we feel about you know, our limited, the limited boundary of our being. I think there is something that sort of intimates something much greater than what we are. And I mean, perhaps even intimates something about the sublime, or what we cannot know, the sort of the greatness, the vastness of the universe, and our smallness in comparison to that. This all sounds a bit heavy, but in actual fact, that kind of is what he was aiming at. And I think, to a certain extent, the real ambition of what he was trying to do kind of defeated him in the end. As you'll know, he came to kind of quite a tragic end. I think Robert Hughes wrote something about these paintings being an expression of the desert god of Judaism, expressed in an abstract way, because obviously, you know, visual representations weren't considered to be, you know, kind of correct in the more extreme forms of that faith. And this final painting that I'm going to talk about is by Bridget Riley. It's from 1960, and it's called Shadow Play. And I quite like the fact that I think she's making a reference to Song by Joy Division there. And we've got some hard edges here. And I think what's quite interesting here is that what we're looking at is something that is really quite physical. It's op art, so it has a kind of physical effect on the way that your optical system works, your eyes in connection with your brain. Kind of find this quite a tricky little puzzle to sort of make sense of. And I think, to a certain extent, when we think of abstract art, we often think of something that is it's almost like it's been dragged out of reality and made more simple, or turned into a kind of diagram or something like that. I think with this, it's more a case of something that's actually been it's a concrete thing in itself. You know, it's got its own very specific identity. Okay, so that, in a way, looking at those paintings, I think it helps us to get an idea of what abstract painting might be. I think it's a kind of interesting idea when we think about the word abstract, and it kind of comes from, I'll pick this up from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And I mean, one of the definitions of that word abstract is difficult to understand. And I think that's kind of interesting, because I'm not entirely sure that these paintings are difficult to understand. I think that in a lot of ways our response to them is really quite direct and quite simple, and that in a way is what really attracts me to the genre. Okay, so let's have a look at one of mine. So this is a painting called Bloom. I'm very fortunate to have this painting feature in a volume, Thames and Hudson book, which is edited by Michael Petrie, and the title of the book is Nature Morte, Contemporary Artists Reconfigure Still Life and Reinterpret Still Life. And yeah, I was rather delighted to be selected for this. It's really rather fantastic book. So, what is this about, and why did I paint it? Well, I think what I'd like you to do, actually, right now, is just have a look at it and see what you think for yourself. Because I think, in a way, that we all have our own view on what abstract paintings might be. That the meanings aren't necessarily fixed. So have a little bit of a think about it for a minute, see what you find in it. Okay, so what I guess I was aiming to do with this was really create something that might have some of that sense of the sublime, or something that's big and unknowable and beyond our human scale, even kind of beyond our direct human understanding. I mean, it's a nebulous form. It could be a nebula. It could be something out there in deep space, or it could be quite simply it could be a cloud, I guess, which that word nebula comes from. The word nebula and cloud is similar in meaning. Or it could simply be what I was hoping it to be, which is a quite beautiful arrangement of kind of soft and hard edges, a subtle kind of blue area in the bottom left, and some rather brighter kind of red areas that, in a way, capture the gestures, the kind of quite fluid use of paint that I was making when when I was using those gestures to apply the paint. Those gestures are records of my progress over the surface of the painting, if you like. And that's something that kind of interests me. It interests me that I can kind of record, my physical presence in time on this piece of cloth. Here's another painting, which is quite simply called Blue Painting. It's similar to the last one in that it's essentially a monochrome. It has areas of quite flat kind of wet paint that are kind of flowing into one another, and it also has areas of quite thickly applied dense paint. I mean, one of the problems we've got here actually is that, it's what I call the conditions of reception. One of the problems we have here is that you can't really see the texture in this photograph. What you're looking at is a flat representation of what is actually quite subtly sort of three-dimensional surface. And but I guess that's where we're at. We spend our time looking at computer screens. I don't think it translates too badly into an image. I think another thing that's going on here is that there's a lot of different kinds of movement, again, that are kind of captured on the surface. Quite similar to the last one in that there's these gestural kind of fluid marks being made, but at the same time there's some quite, in a way, the movement is different in that there's areas that are kind of been a bit more statically applied, if you like, with a palette knife, things like that. This is another painting called Feeding Honey to Bumblebees, which I made kind of in response to the crisis in honeybee populations that we started learning about a couple of years ago. It's also a painting about yellow and black, in which I was aiming to achieve a kind of balance, if you like, between the light and the dark. As you can see, there's some quite, well, I hope anyway, quite interesting areas of different texture and differently applied paint. And what we have at the centre are two quite, in a way, quite solidly defined forms that I hope, in a way, kind of float on that ground of quite fluid paint. Here's the first in a series of black paintings that I made. Why black? I mean, in a way, it's a bit of a cliche, isn't it? It's that idea of the darkness. But I think also you can create a huge amount of contrast between black and white, and that's an interesting area for me. That balancing that contrast, and in here, unfortunately, what this photograph really doesn't enable you to see is quite thickly textured paint with various levels of translucency and transparency. So this is actually, it's almost like the surface of a vase, or it could be something that's I think kind of almost heading towards a kind of two-dimensional sculpture. I'm trying to create a kind of solid sense of form, which is inspired, if you like, by my interest in landscape. And I'll be talking about landscape in my talk tomorrow. This is another of the black paintings that goes along with that last painting in a kind of series. Again, I think there's something of a suggestion of landscape. This kind of white area on the right could almost be a kind of hole, almost could be a cave wall, well, the entrance to a cave through which you're seeing the light, and then it's almost like these are the forms within the cave. I quite like that notion of Plato's cave, where there's a reflection of reality on the back surface, and that's in a way how Plato saw it, that we perceive nearly everything. So this could be a cave. This is a painting from a series that was entitled Liquid Thinking, and again this goes back to Joan Mitchell and her idea of liquid thinking as being a way of making sense of this substance that's in flow, but which actually at a point ceases its flow and becomes fixed in time. That's a very interesting concept if you're into paint and working with fluids, is the point at which they kind of stop being fluid and become fixed, and in a way that's the end of the process. You could say that's when the painting's finished. Quite often actually I'll go back and rework paintings, so that point of fixity doesn't necessarily remain fixed. But I think what we see in this painting is something that's quite detailed. If you look closely at the very fine kind of line work in here, I think what we've got is something that's like a drawing in paint, and then we've got, if you like, a more fluid application, a more bold application of paint using a much thicker brush. So in a way this is something between a painting and a drawing, and I think that kind of distinction between painting and drawing is really, really interesting when we're thinking about abstracts. This is a painting called Melt, which in a way is similar to the last painting. It was made in a similar way. It was using watercolour on a special kind of paper, but I feel that this is less about drawing and more about a kind of opaque way of creating painterly form. And I'm going to leave you with this. So these are 3 paintings in a series. They're called Raw Earth or Paradise Lost, and these paintings are in oil paint and a kind of acrylic plastic, and yeah, they're kind of about the state of the world today, which is something that concerns me deeply. I mean, you've heard my interpretation of Joan Mitchell's paintings, you know, birds. You've heard me talking about feeding honey to bumblebees. Yeah, that's something that, you know, I can't really avoid as a human being thinking about. So I wanted to create something that, in a way, said something about that. So this series is entitled Raw Earth or Paradise Lost. Anyway, I hope that explains that, well, something of my thoughts and my motivations for making abstract paintings. I do hope you can make it along tomorrow to hear a little bit about why I paint landscapes. There's one here behind me. You've probably kind of been having a little glimpse at that while I've been talking. I've got quite a different reason for painting landscapes, and it's been quite a kind of challenge for me to actually make landscapes. But I'll talk about that tomorrow. In the meantime, you can check out some of my other work on Axis Web, and have a look at my Instagram profile. If you want to get in touch with me, then maybe the best way to do that is to send me a message by Instagram. And yeah, thank you so much for spending time with me this morning, and hope to see you tomorrow. Bye bye.